Howdy, my friends. Happy New Year. So this is something that I wanted to share with you. It's just a little technique you could try if you wanted to. It is no more or less useful than any other technique that you are drawn to. And it's something I cheekily call the 3-card pileup. And essentially, it's kind of inspired by a weird source. So when I started reading many moons ago, you know, there's this thing called the familiarity. Oh God, I can't remember the name of it. But there's this thing that happens when you're suddenly familiar with something and you see it everywhere. It's like if you get a Ford Focus as a car, suddenly you start to see Ford Focuses everywhere. When you start reading tarot, you sort of start seeing tarot everywhere. And I can't remember if it was just about the time I was starting reading or what, but like Miss Cleo kind of was a huge thing in the late 90s, early 2000s. And she, if you watched her infomercials, which I was like an infomercial nerd for some reason. I loved infomercials. Not all of them, like usually like the Ronco ones, you know what I mean? Like I didn't really care about the, you know, the Bare Minerals and things like that. But I also, here's an interesting tidbit about me. When I was a kid, I've talked about anxiety on my channel. Like I had anxiety from birth and I had a hard time sleeping when I was a kid. So I would often fall asleep to the Home Shopping Network. So take that. Anyway, she would, you would see her reading and she would have this like lay of 5 cards and they were just piles of 5 cards and she would just like keep flipping them over. But I thought recently, I was sort of thinking about that and I thought, what if, you know, could you actually do that as a reading technique? And I think you can. And I tried it the other night and I found it really kind of fun. And so this is that. This is how you might do that and why. So I mean, why is why you would do it, I guess, is really a matter of just impulse or taste or whatever. But I don't think it matters what method you use. I think I always say this, as long as you know what method you're going to use before you start, that's the key thing. So I'm going to do kind of a cheat version in this video. Oh, for anyone who's wondering, this is the Morgan Greer. It's not a new deck. It's been around for a long time. I pulled this off the shelf the other night because on New Year's Eve, my partner and some friends and I went out to dinner, and there was a woman going around with a tray, and she had an array of tarot cards, and she was doing 1-card tarot readings, and she had this deck, and I hadn't looked at it in a while, and I said, oh, let's look at that one. It's so 70s, but, you know, it's a deck that I've always sort of enjoyed. Now, if I were going to do this for real, what I would do probably, not even probably, is I would just sort of keep doing this until I got, you know, 3 piles of cards all the way through the deck. You know, for the purposes of just doing this little demo, what I'm going to do is just sort of try to divide them into 3 even-ish piles. To just expedite things a little bit, because you don't go through the whole deck if you do this, or you don't necessarily go through the whole deck, but I would be a little more thoughtful about breaking the pack up in that way. This could probably use some more cards on this side. This is like making meatballs where you try to guess the right size of them. All right, so we would shuffle as always. We would think about the question, and then we would boop, 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 until we got through the whole deck into these piles, these 3 piles. All right, and so what I would do, depending on the kind of reading I were doing, is I would use the first card, the first set of 3, and I always do 3-card readings, you know, as a starting point, because I really like them. I think 3 cards is an ideal number for just a simple reading. But this is like a way to take 3 cards and then keep going if you want to. Now, if it were a general reading, what I would do is use the first set of 3 to explore the theme, and then use more cards to sort of keep going deeper until you reach sort of a punctuation mark that feels satisfying. If you have a question, then you would start with the question and use the first 3 cards to explore the answer to that question, and then use additional layers to explore further, to get deeper. I mean, the whole idea behind this is that you start with the surface level, and then as you peel more layers, like an onion, you get deeper into the question, right? So let's start with an example, and I haven't planned this. Let's just say that this is a general reading, and so I turn over 3 cards. The person doesn't necessarily know what they want. They just want a general reading. So I turn over the first 3 cards, face up. I don't use reversals generally. Usually if I do use reversals, it's with Marseille style decks for some bizarre reason, but I often don't even use them then. And so what I would do is say, okay, we have a general reading. What's a situation? When I get a general reading as a request, often what I'm sort of internalizing is, what's an area of opportunity that I need to pay attention to right now? Or what does this person need to pay attention to right now? So I would look at my 3 cards, and so here I have the 9 of Cups, the 2 of Pentacles, and the King of Swords. So it's a general reading. You know, again, it's like you use whatever techniques you use. I'm going to use the techniques that I use as an example, but you do whatever you do, right? You use the way that you read. So I'm always looking for patterns. I'm always looking for themes. I'm always looking for directions when I do a 3-card reading, especially if I don't have a question. And I've got the King of Swords who's looking to the 2 and the 9, right? So there's sort of this directionality there. And so I have this person, I'm going to say this represents my client in this case, or me if the reading is for me. So the King of Swords, what do I know about the King of Swords? I start to internalize that. So I have an individual who happens to have been through a lot. I always think of the King of Swords as sort of battle-weary and scarred. Actually, if you watched one of my most recent videos, the King of Swords came up as a significator for me. And I talked about the King of Swords as someone who communicates hard things and doesn't necessarily do it in an easy way. You know, they cut through the bullshit. So I have an individual who's really mature, who's been around the block, who's experienced some stuff, not easy stuff, and because of that has come out and is the kind of person who's like, you know what, look, this is life, this is the way shit goes. All right, and then I have this person thinking or looking at this situation. So I have the 2 of Pentacles and the 9 of Cups. So rather than reading 1, 2, 3, in this case, I'm actually reading 1, 2, 3 this way. They're really 3, 2, 1 because the energy drives that way. But again, this is just how I do it. If you do 1, 2, 3, you do 1, 2, 3. That's fine. All right, so I have a person who is this, thinking a lot about this. And so the 2 of Pentacles suggests a pull apart. You know, a lot of people think of this card as juggling. 2s are duality, right? There's a polarity and a duality. So there's like a push and a pull. And so for me, 2s are often an idea of struggle between 2 things, choosing between 2 things, being pulled in 2 different directions. And then, of course, Pentacles for me are about responsibilities, about duties, about family, about money, about work, about all that stuff. All right, so this person is thinking about the fact that life is kind of pulling them in 2 different directions, and there's there's competing responsibilities that they need to pay attention to. So remember, this was a general reading, so the implicit question for me was, what's an area of opportunity this person needs to pay attention to? This person is represented by the King of Swords, and they are someone whose life is pulling them in different directions, and they don't really know where to go. They don't really know what to choose. There's sort of, you know, the polarity is the poles are being pushed apart because life is pulling them in different directions. And that's emotionally exhausting for them. So the 9 of Cups, you know, this is often a positive card to a lot of people. One of the things that I like about this particular Rider-Waite-Smith deck is these kind of neutral situations that they depict. There's not a lot of facial clues that suggest emotional state. And so what that allows me to do as a reader is to think about the 9 as more than just being the wish card, which it sometimes is called, right? So I have someone who's in a tough spot. That doesn't make them feel good. Like the normal reading of the 9 of Cups doesn't make sense to me there. But the numerological meaning of 9, of being like pushed and having to climb the hill and get to the finish line as an exhausting thing, emotions being as the 9 of Cups. You know, that gives me a story, a narrative that makes sense. So this really smart person who's been through a lot of shit's able to cut through the bullshit usually is actually in a position where they're not able to cut through the bullshit because they're torn between a lot of different life responsibilities, and that's causing them some emotional exhaustion. All right, so that's my first layer. So now I want to dig deeper, right? Because that's like a good start, but where do I go from there? All right, so now I peel back another layer. All right, so I don't have another question. I'm just going to see what this next row of cards tells me. So here I get the 5 of Wands. I'm sorry, the 7 of Wands, the Star, and the High Priestess. All right, so Now I just sort of look again for visual clues. Who seems like the character? In this case, I'm going to take maybe a controversial step and use a gendered mirror, or a gendered rhyme, so to speak, and assume that because the King of Swords depicts a male. Now, again, this is like a totally... This is just me doing this on the fly. Like, and I recognize that in choosing a gendered approach to this, I'm using a particularly controversial thing. But what I'm looking for is a continuation of the narrative, right? And the King of Swords and the Nine of this sort of narrative here seems well represented in the Seven of Wands as someone who's sort of fighting back a tide, you know, who's trying to stay on top of things. So this sort of carries the narrative of this person over to here. And that, again, this is just, you know, I call it a rhyme because I'm sort of carrying over this bearded dude to this bearded dude. So it's not even a sense that it's like a dude. Like, it could be anything, but like I have these two, move these down a little bit. I have these two characters with beards, and it makes me say, okay, so here's this person moving into this row. So this card, in essence, confirms what I already know, which is like they're feeling pulled in two directions. It's exhausting, and it's because like all of their energy, wands, their enthusiasm, their passion, their energy is trying to stem back the tide. And then we get into two trump cards here. So we have the Star and the High Priestess. So now I start to think about like, what does this say for this person? Am I seeing any visual clues in the row? Not necessarily. Like, not like this row where the king was definitely looking in this direction. You know, this guy is looking sort of off. So he's not seeing the High Priestess and the Star behind him. That's one thing I can say. But I can also start to internalize things that I know about the cards. All right, so I start to think about the Star. The Star is often about hope and stillness and quiet. For me, it's also about a sense of direction. To me, it's like a guidepost, like the GPS of the trumps. And then the High Priestess, to me, often is just like, is mystery, is withheld information. Information that has to be earned, etc. So this is an interesting combination. I don't immediately click and go, oh, this makes sense. What I get a sense of is that this person's direction is clouded. So this person is feeling sort of defensive because their normal sense of direction is being withheld. Now, I tend to read very, very, like, what's the least common denominator card meaning. So you could get into a lot of mystical stuff about this. But when I think about where this went initially, we're talking about responsibilities. And this person's sense of direction is being withheld. So now I'm going to pull back another layer and see if maybe we can find out why, or what's the next thing. So we have the Wheel of Fortune, Strength, and the King of Cups. All right. So we have the Wheel of Fortune. So that, again, no directionality necessarily, other than that the King of Cups is looking off away from these folks. So I start to get a feeling of like every time I'm looking at the guy in this reading, the guy, the male energy, let's talk about it that way. If we think about yin and yang, the active energy is looking in the other direction. And so he's not looking at his strength, his power in a tumultuous time. So he's actually abdicating his responsibility, his sense of self, because his defensiveness, as we know, his feeling that he has to like stay on top of all of these things, is preventing him from actually focusing on his innate ability to handle the change. So we now know why he's not focused on the right things. So we get the Ten of Swords now, we get the Hanged Man, and we get the Hermit. So now I'm looking again, we have the Hermit sort of looking in this direction, but to me the Hermit's not really looking anything. He's sort of looking down to the face of the Hanged Man if I really want to get that way. He's defeated if we look at the Rider-Waite Ten of Swords. But, you know, if I look at the Ten of Swords in general, he's also at the end of a cycle, right? So he's nearing the end of this situation. But it's a state of suspended animation. What he probably needs to do is isolate himself from all of these responsibilities. So what he may needs to do is step back, sort of retreat from the fray, right? Because it's going to beat him one way or the other. If things keep going the way it is, he's going to get beat. So he sort of needs to accept defeat and retreat. right? So we accept defeat. So now we come to the 9 of swords, the 4 of swords, and the 4 of wands. So we have some mirroring here. We have 2 4s. So if I just focus on the visual nature of this card, I get a sense of sort of like this card in a more traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck would be the one with someone like in bed feeling anxious. But this sort of this sense of being bound is like, okay, I accept defeat. I accept this. I surrender, you know, is what this says. And I retreat. I rest. And I stabilize my energy. So what I get a sense of now, as after going through these layers so far, is there's like a lot of chaos, a lot of turmoil. He's not going to win this battle, is what I know now, right? He's trying to like defend himself against everything, but he's not going to win. The 9 and the 10 of swords tell me that. The Hanged Man and the Hermit tell me he has to accept defeat and rest. And this row says the same thing. Affect defeat and rest and stabilize your energy. So now what I know is the situation that he's dealing with is that he needs to accept that he can't win. He's going to be pulled in these 2 directions. There's no getting on top of it. So sometimes you got to accept the situation in life, do what you can, and then you got to step back and rest. Say, okay, you win. I'm done. I'm stepping out of this situation. You know, and if this person were here, I could find out more about what that situation is. You know what I mean? Like, I think when I talked about the 2, initially, I said, you know, it could be pulling responsibilities, but the pentacles can also represent family members. Like maybe he's caught between a fight between 2 family members, right? And he has to choose sides. Well, there's no choosing sides. So he's got to like go off the field of battle, you know, and restore his energy. So now I have an answer. I have a situation, I have a description of it, and I have an answer. So depending on, you know, where we were going and how deep I wanted to go, I could really sort of stop here because I have a situation, I have a description of it, and then I have the advice. And if you watch my channel at all, you know that I'm always looking for evidence. And one of the nice things of this reading was that as I pulled back each layer, something in each layer seemed to confirm the thing in the row before it. You know what I mean? So in this new row, this final row, the 9 of swords seemed to confirm my thing that you have to accept defeat and retreat. The 9 of swords normally would depict something else to me, but just this image here, I'm just going off the image of like surrender, confirms that for me. You know, when I went back, if I went back a row, oh, I can't even remember now. Oh, see, so this is an example of that not really doing this. So this said something new, which is that you're ignoring your own strength in this changing situation, in this chaotic situation. I didn't really talk about the King of Cups. So he would represent emotional intelligence, you know, and having the emotional intelligence to withdraw. I didn't need that though. Like sometimes cards speak louder than others. It's hard to rewind these things. But in the second row, it confirmed this card, the 7 of Wands, confirmed the feeling I got from the first row. So what happens is that was a nice thing where, like, as I dug deeper, there was something in each row that seemed to confirm my previous thing. And that's a really comforting thing as a reader because it provides me evidence that I'm going down the right path. And the time where it was the hardest, which was the third row with the Wheel and Strength and the King of Cups, was a time where it wasn't really supporting evidence. It was saying something new. Although, now that I think about it, it was reaffirming a chaotic situation. And the absence of strength, the relegation of strength to avoidance from someone who's normally really emotionally mature does, now that I think about it, kind of confirm that. Whew, that's a lot of talking. I get really excited when I do this stuff. So let me just sort of clear the decks here and clear the deck, as it were. Let's just put these aside. Now let's say someone has a question. You know, we can do the same thing. And again, how many layers you pull back, I think depends on what you need from the reading and what you're trying to get out of the reading and what the person needs from the reading. So let's say this is Susan, and Susan wants to know how to deal with a conflict she's having with her boss, right? So I'm gonna, as I did, I shuffle like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 until the deck is exhausted, and I have all the ones laid out before me. And so I turn over the first set, and so her question was, how do I deal with this conflict I'm having with my boss? All right, so now we have a really interesting row. We've got the Knight of Swords, we've got the Six of Swords, and we've got the Knight of Rods. So now I've got 2 court cards. This is interesting. A lot of people want to know when the court cards represent the person you're reading for or yourself, or when they represent someone in your life or the life of the person you're reading for. In a case like this, where we have 2 of the same rank, that's a really nice indication for me that the cards represent, one of them represents the querent and one of them represents the person. And remember, we have the querent and her boss. So what I see immediately is that we have 3 people all looking in this direction. We've got 3, so we've got the Knight of Swords looking towards this card looking towards this card, and this card looking at nothing. And so right out of the gate, my instinct tells me the client, the person I'm reading for, is the Knight of Swords. And the Knight of Swords is a forward motion energy, like I need to like go into battle. And the Six of Swords in this case is the movement of the battle. You know what I mean? So the Knight of Swords is like, I'm gonna get in my boat and take all my grudges with me and like go into battle with my boss. And so the Knight of Rods represents the boss. Now again, I'm not necessarily taking traditional meanings of the Six of Swords here by my own numerology or by my own, or by the Rider-Waite-Smith, right? Because the Six of Swords in Rider-Waite-Smith is often about moving on past grief, onto greener pastures, you know, into a new phase of life. For me, the 6 represents beauty and rebalance, sometimes vanity, and then of course swords are the mind and thinking and communication. But in this case, just the energy of this card is a carrier. It's like a vowel sound in this spread of 3. Right? So the Knight of Swords is moving into battle with the Knight of Rods, but the Knight of Rods isn't thinking about any of this. The Knight of Rods has his energy focused on the future. I'm like, I gotta get shit done, you know what I mean? So the Knight of Rods probably doesn't even know there's any conflict going on here. So that tells me a whole lot about the relationship. Now again, I want to apologize for my gendered pronouns here. It's hard to avoid that. I will try to be better about that in the future, but it's, you know, it's ingrained. So it's something we need to sort of think about. But anyway, the knight is going into this battle hungry knight, and the Knight of Swords, I would argue, is pretty battle hungry, right? He's got a weapon. He's the, you know, both the knights have weapons, which is interesting, but this is like a weapon that cuts. This is a weapon that bludgeons. And so I think it also represents something about their relationship, which is this person's instinct is to like cut. This person just bludgeons to get forward. All right. So now I know what the situation is, which is that the conflict that this person is fighting is probably not even in the realm of the boss's view right now. All right. So we pull back a layer. Page of Swords, the Ace of Pentacles, and the 10 of Pentacles. All right, so the Page of Swords is a nice carrier from the previous reading, and in the position, it also makes sense to sort of drop down, and it reduces this Knight of Swords to a more innocent but also immature place. And then I have the Ace of Pentacles and the 10 of Pentacles. And so what I see here, now this is not the most flattering reading. This is one of those times where as a reader, we have to be thoughtful about how we approach things. This sort of somewhat immature fighter is focused on the extremes of their business, of their life. You know what I mean? So they're focused on the extreme ends of things. They're focused on the Ace and the 10. Now again, the traditional meanings of the Ace of Pentacles don't mean as much to me in this case as the fact that this person, I have a 1 and a 10. It's like this person manages to skip the entire array of nuance in business, and I'm looking at the 10 of Pentacles as business. So the conflict with the boss seems to be stemming in part from the fact that the boss doesn't really know about the conflict, and this person's thinking in a really naive way about how business works. They're looking at the extreme bookends of the situation and not thinking at all about 2 through 9, about how you get where you get. You know, this reminds me of the stereotype, not the accurate from my perception, the stereotype of the millennial who expects to go from college to CEO. You know what I mean? That's a stereotype. I haven't found that to be true. But this person comes in the door at the entry level, and then immediately they want to be running the show. You know, so I'm getting a picture right now of a conflict that really stems primarily from an individual's perception of a situation and not an actual conflict. So let's see what the next layer proves or shows. We have another knight. We have the Knight of Pentacles, the Nine of Wands, and the Chariot. All right, so war. The Chariot isn't, you know, the Chariot's my birth card. I always think of it as like forward motion and let's go for a ride and let's get it done. But it's a vehicle of war. Another knight. We have the Knight of Pentacles facing off with the Nine of Wands and the Chariot of War. This to me deepens the portrait of the person I'm reading for. They really want to get ahead in business, but what they're concerned about is how they race to the finish line. Like the 9 here is like, remember my description of 9s from earlier. 9s are about pushing to the finish line, pushing up the hill. So this business-minded person, the Knight of Pentacles, is going in search of, is hunting really hard to like get to the end, like the top of the ladder, with all of their energy, and they're gonna like bludgeon, they're gonna like race into battle no matter where they go. So I have this really kind of deep textured portrait of a person who is not really considering nuance. They're so engaged and like expending all of their energy to just like get where they want to go that they've invented a conflict that doesn't exist, and they're actually getting in the way of their own progress. So we pull back another layer. And so we get the World, we get the Knight of Cups, and we get Judgment. And so to me, this is a change. To me, what this says is, look, if you want to get everything you want, you've got to be more emotionally mature and wake up. You've got to be more of a romantic. Enjoy the ride. The Knight of Cups enjoys where the knight is going. They are romantic. They have a more beautiful view of the world, and just wake up to what's going on. Like, just see things clearly. You know, don't get offended by this portrait of yourself. Use this as an opportunity to wake up and say, if you want to get what you want, you've got to be more romantic about it. You've got to like go in with kindness. You've got to go in with generosity. You've got to use your intuition. You can't do this like burn all the bridges, storm all the castles to get where you want to go. Wake up to this. Be this guy and not the King of Swords or the Knight of Swords you were at the beginning. So this feels like a good punctuation mark. I could keep going if I wanted to, but the point is not that we use as many cards as possible. The point is that we get a deepening layer, a deepening level of information. We peel back the onion until we reach a punctuation mark, until we reach a the end that feels right. You know, if the person wanted to now explore this, like, how do I do that? Honestly, I would probably reshuffle and do another 3-card pile up for that. You know what I mean? Because this is changing the tone. This is that's a new question now. All of the cards leading up to this were like, tell me about my conflict with my boss. And the punctuation mark ended up being, here's how you get out of that punctuation. Here's how you get what you want. Now, when he says, how do I bring this to life? Or she says, how do I bring this to life? That's a new question. I might leave these cards out as significators and then shuffle the whole deck again. But again, it depends on the situation, and it depends on, you know, a lot of my readings are done on video, so I don't always have that opportunity. And that's one reason I price my readings fairly low, is so that if people want a follow-up reading, because I find a lot of readings inspire follow-up questions. I don't want it to seem like I'm scamming you. Like, I have relatively low price readings, because if you do want to follow up, it's not $200, it's like $40 and then another $40. It's not going to break the bank to a lot of people. So anyway, that's just, to me, like a really fun, cool way to explore deepening levels of a reading, deepening levels of a question or a general spread, where we allow ourselves to keep peeling back the onion. And so just to recap, it's really nothing more complex than deciding what the reading is going to be about and shuffling the deck the same way you always would, you know, whether you have the querent shuffle it or you shuffle it or whatever, you know, so we shuffle, and then we just alternate making piles of 3 forever until the deck is done, and then we just keep reading the layers. So you know, I'm sure I didn't come up with this. Honestly, remember, it was inspired by like a TV psychic, so I'm sure someone came up with it, you know. So, but I haven't read about this anywhere. There are some things in the Golden Dawn, like the opening of the key, which are similar to this, but there's like a whole long operation that you do to like even get here. You know what I mean? And you do it with piles of 4, and each pile of 4 represents one of the Hebrew letters in the Tetragrammaton, and you look for the significator in the pile the querent wants to know about. So, you know, pile 1 represents work, and the significator shows up in that pile. You read that pile. If it doesn't show up in that pile, you don't read, you know. It's like a whole long complicated thing. This is much simpler, but I do think it's a fun way to like, I like to use a lot of cards in a reading. I also like to do large spreads, but I don't always have a lot of room for them. So like, this is a way to use a lot of cards to get a lot of information in a way that has structure, in a way that has a bounding box, in a way that like helps you build a deeper narrative and lets you use as many cards as you need. No more, no less. So you don't feel like, let me just throw out another card. Because that was a thing I used to do. You know, I would lay out like a 3-card spread and then be like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Like, what's that mean? Oh, what's that mean? What's that mean? Oh, I don't know. And then I would start to muddy the water. You know what I mean? But in doing something like this, you have a system behind it. You're not just randomly just saying, what's that mean? I don't know. I need to clarify it. Oh my God. That's the voice I do, and I'm making fun of myself, by the way. You know what I mean? There's like, okay, we're always going to do sets of 3, and we're going to keep going until we get the punctuation mark that feels like it ties up the reading in a decent enough bow. That I've given practical information, I have a deep understanding of the issue, and I know what I should do about it, you know? And maybe it inspires another set of 3, another reading where we do this again. But you know what I mean? Like, it's just, to me, I always talk about elasticity in card images, but I love the idea of elasticity in spreads too, you know what I mean? Because there are times where I'll do like my favorite Council of 13, you know, and like 5 cards in or 3 sets of 3 in, I already know, and I'm still like, okay, let's go through the rest of these 13 cards. Like, I don't even need them, you know, but you go through it because that's what the person paid for. Where in this case, it's like, this probably is a harder thing to charge for if you read for money, because you know, you might use 6 cards and you might use 36 cards. So, you know, it's really about the quality of the response and not about the number of cards or the time spent doing it. And to me, you know, it's not a reading. A really, really brilliant reading can be 5 minutes or 40 minutes. Depends on the situation, what the question is, and how deep it can go. You know, you could try to do this 3-card thing, these 3-card piles, and the first 3 could tell you everything you need to know. And sometimes that happens too. So, but it's nice to have the flexibility. So if you've done this before, I'd love to hear your version of it. If you haven't and you try it, let me know how that goes. And again, Happy New Year, and I hope you're all well. Be good.